Hey you guys, there is a question I've been getting from people a lot, and I've been trying to explain to people how they need to fix that problem, but it's a little bit tricky and it requires a few steps, so I thought I'd make a little video to make it clear. So what I've done is I've made a very basic, very simple type of invoice. This invoice goes out to a certain customer and it has certain parts on it, and it also has certain services on it. Now a lot of people will have this kind of a situation where you have multiple types of things on your invoice, and in this case it's parts and services, but it could be basically anything. And it's kind of handy to put these things in different kind of portals and on different tabs, because then you can see the total for the parts and the total for the services, and that's pretty handy, and the grand total shows up on top here. And the way the people would usually set that up is that they would have a table for all their parts, they would have another table for all their services, and then if we go and look in the relationships graph here, you will have like invoices table, you will have basically the parts for the invoice, how shall I say, like the line items for the parts, line items for the services, and then you will have parts and services here as well, and then these two different tables, and then you will have a table for the customers. So all of this kind of makes a lot of sense, and that looks kind of good. So your parts on the invoice go in here, the services on the invoice go in here, and this is just to kind of show these are just two different tables to kind of show the names of the parts and the services on your invoice. And that's all kind of cool, and that's pretty logical until you kind of try to make an invoice, or a quote in this case, with some quote and or invoice information on the top, and then you want to list all of your parts and all of your services, and you realize that in this kind of setup with this kind of a layout, and this happens to be a layout based on the table invoice parts, and that is kind of smart to do it like that, to show all the records for the invoice parts, because then you can make a list, and that's super flexible, and everything that you want can just like show up there, and no matter how many parts you put on your invoice, they all show up. But the problem with this is it's only showing the parts and not the services. And if you do this kind of a print invoice, you're gonna have to base it on a table, and if you have two different tables that you're using to list all of your like invoice line items, then you're gonna run into trouble when you get to this step. So a lot of people will set up their whole system, and this would be like the last thing they do, and then they realize like, oh, I've got a problem. So, and a good way to, or one way to solve this would be if you could, for instance, use a temporary table where you import both all the parts for this invoice and all the services for this invoice into like a temporary table, and then use that one to make your invoice. But the problem with that is, especially if you've got multiple users, if multiple users are like trying to print an invoice at the same time, then all of those data will go into the same table, and then you will get a whole bunch of stuff from another invoice on your invoice, and that's just a mess. So this setup, even though it looks like it's really logical and really clean, does make a lot of sense, but you're going to get into trouble with this. So let's see if we can't figure out a way to do exactly this, but not have the problem in the end of having to put two different tables on one single print invoice. So the way I would usually do this is I would make one single table for your invoice details, so not these two, and I would also put both of these guys in the same table. And to distinguish them, you could have like a single products table, and you could simply add a type field where you say that this item is a part and this item is a service. But you can have all of that in one simple single table. So let's start by taking the parts table. Let's start and do this one step at a time, and let's simply add a type field. This is going to be a text field, which is fine. So now we've got the type. Okay, so now when we go to our parts field, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change the name of my parts, and I'm going to call this one products. And I'm going to change the name. There we go. And then let's see, we've got a product ID, we've got a, well, it's not a part name anymore, but it's like a description or name, I guess. Let's change that. It has a price and it has a certain type. So what we need to do right now, because I've got this set up as a table view, what would be pretty handy is if we created a layout for this. So let's go to our invoice layout, let's make a new layout, and let's make a layout for the products. And let's call this one lay products. Let's make a form view, yep, okay, cool. And then let's have a few fields on here. Let's say I want the description. I want to on my Mac, alt drag this to get the price. And I want to get also the type. Great. So now I've got my multiple different records, but the type field hasn't been filled in yet. That's all right. I can actually also just simply go to my, well, I'll just continue here for a sec. On my type field, I'm gonna want to put a little drop down here, and I'm gonna say I've got the type of product, and that's either going to be a part or a service. Great, so now I've got my drop down and I can say that all of these things are all parts. And then I had a couple of services as well. Let's do this, let's go to file, import records from this file itself. Let's, which one am I working with? Invoice portals. Let's import from the services into the products. Let's not import the ID. Let's do the service and the price. Yep, that's good. Let's do this. Let's import. Okay, I've imported 3 apparently. Let's have a look at my products table and let's show them all. Let's modify to add my type field. Cool. So I've got a couple of parts and I've got a couple of services. Did I choose service or services on my layout? I don't remember. So let's try and see. Service. Okay, cool. So on my table of products. So a little tip. If you have already created a whole lot of records and you do some kind of an import like this, where you have to fill in this field for all of the records, what you can do is, I'm going to do a find to find all of the empty, the ones that don't have their type filled in yet, and you can use an operator for that to match empty. It's just an is equal sign. I'm going to do a find, and that way I can find all the ones that have not been filled in yet, and then what I can do is I can type something like service, and then I can go to records, replace field contents, and then I can say that I want to permanently replace the contents of the field type in the 2 records of the current found set, and I want to replace all of those with service. Now it's just 2 records, so it doesn't make a lot of sense, but if it's like 100 records, then this is really handy. So now it replaces that value in all of those found records, and then if I show all, then I can see that I've got all of my products now, and they all have a type. That's kind of good. Now you might be thinking, what if I make a list layout? Let's do a little button here and let's do show list. And if you want, you can do something like this. And what if I now create a list of my products and I want to see only one certain type of product? That's a good question. The first thing I would have to do is create a list, which I don't have yet. So I'm going to go to File, Manage Layouts. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start from this one. That needs to be in here. I'm going to make a little lists folder. put this up here, and then I'm going to say I'm going to duplicate this one real quick, and I'm going to just change it, list products, and I want to show records from products. That's good. Let's go into that list products, and now I'm going to make a list. I don't need this button here, but I'm going to make this one a little higher. In fact, let's make it a 75. And then I'm going to put description as a label up here. Wow, that's a big font. I'm going to take these labels out. I'm going to do this description, price, and type. Okay, so let's copy these by alt dragging and changing the labels. Okay, and now I want to make this body part a little smaller so that it fits like this. And I'm gonna want to do a little button setup. I'm gonna do a single step, and it's very simple. Go to layout, and the layout is gonna be lay products. Okay, cool. Very simple stuff. Change the cursor to a hand. Then I'm gonna make this text look blue and underlined so it looks more like a link that you can click. Okay, now I want to view this as a list because I want to see all my records. So I'm going to go into this little pencil here, which is layout setup, and I'm going to say that I would like to have a list view as my default view and only list view and nothing else. Okay, so now I've got all of my products, and some of them are parts and some of them are services. Now what I could do is kind of separate or group them by making a new part. So I'm going to go to layouts part setup, and I'm going to create a sub summary when sorted by type, because I want to group them by the type and I want to print this type above. Okay, that gives me a new part. That's done. The part is here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a text tool, drag a box here, and I'm going to go into insert merge field. And I'm going to say, give me my type here. Now I want this to be a little bit bigger and bold, so I can nicely isolate this. Okay, let's make this a bit higher. All right, let's have a look. Now, if I go back into my layout, I don't see anything. Nothing has changed. But when I made that part, it said, give me a sub-summary part when sorted by. So I do have to sort these records, and they are kind of, they do look like they're sorted correctly here. But if I would sort them by price, for instance, then you would see that they're all kind of messed up, and that doesn't really put them all together. The only way to really group them is to sort them by type, because the sub-summary part was called sub-summary when sorted by type. So when I sort by type, then my sub-summary part does show up. So now I've got, first of all, this one is blue and has these boxes, which I don't like because these don't have like borders around them. I don't like that, so I'm going to turn that off in my layout setup. I'm going to uncheck delineate fields on current record only because I think that's annoying. So see, now all the borders do show up, and now I've got this list nicely organized. I'm showing all my parts here and all my services here. Now I can click and go here, and I can use this this button setup to go to whoops, oh no, it's gotten stuck. All right, so FileMaker crashed a bit, but then we're back now. We can take this button and have it do a single step, which could be a go to layout, and then we could go to the list of the products, which is kind of cool. Let's quickly go into button setup and make sure that under the options my cursor changes to a hand, because I really like to have that for my button. The only danger about this is if you maybe do a find for something and you want to find like a wheel. Okay, then you found a wheel. If you do this and go back in your list, or if you do this and you do show all, then your sorting is kind of disappeared. It's kind of gone. So that's kind of annoying. So if you want to not have that happen, you're going to need to add a few more steps to this script, if you will. You need to do a few more things and just go to the layout. So let's make our new script here, and there is apparently one already. Go to product list. Okay, and we're gonna do the same thing. Go to layout, and we're gonna go to the list of products, but what we're gonna add to this is maybe a show all records, and then we're maybe gonna do a little sort records with dialog off, and then we're going to specify the sort order as being sorted by the type. That's good. And then what we'll add for fun is a go to record request page first and a scroll window home, so that we're always at the top of the list. So let's save this script. Let's go here, let's go, oops, actually I need to go first to here. Then let's go change this button. Let's say perform a script, and perform the script go to products list. Okay, so now whenever I'm here, even if I do finds and stuff like that, when I click show list, I'm always going to show up with my nicely sorted list. Now, if I want to only see my parts or only my services, I could even have a button on my menu that brings me to just like a list of my services. I can simply do that by performing a find. So I can put a button up here, and maybe I need to make my header a little bit bigger. That'll do. And then I can take my inspector, which has gotten lost there, and see how high this is. 30 will be high enough. And I can just use my styling here to give it a nice color. And then I can have a button for services. And what I can do is, if I just want to see only the parts or the services, I can just perform a simple find. And that's another script. And that would be a script find services or parts, find parts. Okay, very simple. Enter. Oops. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a freeze window, because if I'm doing some actions and I want to see my screen change, enter find mode, but I'm not going to pause, so I'm going to turn the pause off. Then I'm going to do set fields, and the field that I'm going to search in is in my products type, because I'm looking for all products of a certain type, and the type is going to be parts. And then I'm going to do a set error capture on, because I don't want to get an error message if no products with the type part are found. Then I'm going to do a perform find, and then I'm going to do a sort records with the dialog off, and I'm going to specify the sort order as being sorted by the type. Okay, that's cool. And then if I want to, I can copy these, just copy them and just paste them in here, just to go to the top of the list. Okay, let's save this one, and let's say that this one needs to perform a script, find parts. Okay, there. One thing is missing, actually two things are missing. And my button setup. I need to change the cursor to a hand. Okay, that's one thing I need to do. And let's show all. I've made a mistake. The type is part and not parts. So I need to change my script to search not for the word parts, but for the word part. Okay, let's save that script and let's try this again. Parts. Okay, now my part shows up. Now what I can do is go back to my scripts. I can just copy, paste that one. And I could say find services. And it's the exact same thing, where this one changes to service. I'm going to guess that it is singular. I'm going to save this one. I'm going to go into this one, this button setup. And I'm going to perform a script, find services, and change cursor to a hand. Okay, that's kind of good. I've got my parts that I can just list. And I got my services. And what I could do, because now when I hit my show list, everything shows up. Either that's a good thing or that's not, depending on how you want to use your file. If you don't want your go-to list layout to show everything again, then you can just simply amend the file and say, go to the layout and just do the sort, and don't do this one. So you could just get rid of this step And then if I search for all the services and I go to a service and I go back to my list, I'm seeing only the services. And if I want to see other stuff, I need to either click here, or I seem to be missing a button, and that is show all. So I'm gonna get that one, maybe make it a bit blue or yellow, it's fine. Show all. Good, and now I need to make a script for that, and that's basically the same as this. I'm gonna just duplicate this one. Show all products. I'm not gonna enter find mode. I'm not gonna do any of these steps. So this is gonna be a simple show all records, and then I'm gonna sort and scroll up. That's all good. All pretty simple stuff, pretty basic. So I'm gonna go to the button setup and say that show all products script needs to be run from that button, and that way I've got my parts, I've got my services, or I've got my show all. And if I go in here and I have everything shown, I go back to my list, everything is there. If I got my services and I select one and go back to my list, then I'm seeing only my services. So this is kind of cool, even though they are all in the same table. You can still kind of separate them out, your parts and your services, if you want to. But the cool thing now is that they're all in the same table, and that helps me when I want to not work with two tables here. So this one is actually kind of not necessary anymore right now. So this one can already go. Boom. That one's gone. Now if I go to my layout of my invoice, I'm probably going to be missing, yeah, some stuff here. Because that one is gone, I can also get rid of this one. So invoice services can be deleted. And then I'm going to change this one to invoice details. And I'm going to change the name. And that way you can see that this thing is starting to get a little simpler. And also, whoops. You have less repetitive work, because now we only had parts and services, but if you have multiple different types of things, then you would have multiple different types of, how shall I say, multiple different types of table occurrences that you all have to set up, and it's a lot of repetitive, boring work. So, now what do we have here? When we go to our parts, we can select a part. But as you can see right now, both my parts and my services are showing up in my dropdown. That's not very handy. So I could, for instance, choose maintenance, which is actually service, and set it in here, and that's kind of not really what I want. So now the next step that I need to do is create some sort of a separation between the parts and the services for this portal. Now, if I'm gonna make my invoice, my printed invoice, I'm also gonna wanna separate these things. So I'm gonna have parts and services, kind of the same way as what I have on my list of products when I show them all. I need to have them separated like this, and the only way to do that is to have a field like the type field in my products, where I've kind of listed whether if that's a part or a service. So what I could do right now is I could go to my invoice and I could say, you know what, I'm gonna add a field, like a type field in my invoice details. And then that could be a text field, cool. Then what I could do is I could simply add my part field here from invoice details. Ooh, my type field, sorry. And then I could change this to a default, because that way it has borders. I'm going to say type. Then what I could do is say that, let's add to this the little drop down list type of product suite, because that way I can say that part, this is a part, this is a part, this is also part, but this one is actually service. And then what I can do is I can restrict this portal to only show parts and not show services. Now the way you could do that is to use a portal filter that will show you only the parts and not the services. But the problem that I have with that is if you're going to use a portal filter, which would be here in your setup filter portal records, the problem that I have with that is it does help you with the displaying and not displaying of certain items, but it doesn't help you with the creation of new items, because right now I could still like add a service, and then I'd have to change this field, which is something I don't really want to have to deal with. This thing is just something I don't want to manually do. I want to have this done automatically. And that's why I'm not going to use portal filters. I'm going to use a relationship to kind of show different records on these like different tables here in these different portals. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to have a look here at my relationship diagram. And what happens when I create an invoice detail, the invoice IDFK is automatically filled in because it's a part of the relationship. And so when I create a record here, FileMaker knows that that record has to be related to this invoice, and so it automatically fills in the invoice ID. Now, if I want to, I can add a second relationship there, which could automatically fill in my type of invoice detail. Now, the only way to do that is to also have that type in this table as well, because the only way to really force something to be filled in is that you need to have it, a field for it, in both of these tables. So that means that if I want a part or a service filled in here, then that value needs to come from this side, from my invoices. And that's something that I can very easily do. I can go to my tables invoice and I can just add a couple of fields with a fixed value. So I'm going to write G for global value, and I'm going to write part. And it's simply a text field, and I'm going to type G_service. Now I wrote G because it's going to be a kind of a global field, but it's not really going to be a global field, but it's going to be a field where every record has the same value. And I can very simply do that by creating an auto enter part text here, so that every time I create a new invoice, this value is filled in automatically. And now that I have that, a field that just contains the value part and the value service, different field, now I can use these fields in a relationship. Now I'm not going to mess around with this one because I do need to have this one for when I want to print an invoice. I'm going to show all the records, but for my portals, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some new invoice detail table occurrences. So I'm going to select this one, and I'm going to either use these two little green crosses, or on my Mac, I'm going to Alt drag this one over here, and I'm going to say invoice details _ parts. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to make the same relationship as I would always do, ID invoice IDFK, but I'm going to add one, and I'm going to say the G part, so the field with the value part, needs to be related to my type. And that way, if I create a record now, when I'm on the invoice layout, I create a record in this one, the invoice will be filled in and the type will be filled in with the value part. So that's kind of where my trick is, and this is kind of cool. I have to double click on this one and then say allow creation and delete related records, because if I delete the invoice, I don't want to keep those invoice details because the invoice is gone. I don't need those invoice details anymore. It's better that they get cleaned up. I'm going to alt drag this again, and I'm going to say this is service. And I do the same setup, invoice ID to invoice ID, and the service needs to go to the type field. Again, don't forget to set these two little check marks here so that I can actually create services on my invoice, and I can delete all those services when my invoice gets deleted. I actually probably don't need to set that one if I've already set it here, because if I delete an invoice through this relationship, all the invoice details will already be deleted, so it is not really necessary to set those checkboxes there, but yeah, I've checked them anyway. Okay, so that's one step. Now, one thing we do need to remember, if we go to our invoice table and we modify this to plus add those two fields, then we will see that they are empty. Now, if I make a new record from that moment on, this value will be in here, But for the existing records that I already had, that value had not been put in there. That was an auto enter value, and that was not yet active before. So now I do have to make sure that I do fill in these guys, and I can just do that by going into this one, going to records, replace field content, and then it already suggests, do you want to replace it with part? Yes, I do. So now it has the value part in every single record. I'm going to also do that for service. And then these things are filled in, because they do actually have to be filled in, otherwise this stuff is not gonna work. I'm gonna delete this invoice record again because I just made that to get those values. Okay, let's go back to my invoice layout, and now I have my parts, I have my services. This is all empty because my table has gone missing, but that's fine. I'm going to start making some changes. So first of all, the records here don't need to come from my invoice details. They need to come from my invoice details parts. I don't want to sort, I don't want to filter, and all the rest looks kind of good, so that's fine. That does mean that I do have to make some changes in here. For instance, I need to show my product description from somewhere else. Maybe not. Let's have a look. Oh no, the products is still going to come from products here, and then in my invoice details I can actually change the parts IDFK to product IDFK. Cool. So this one is probably cool. I'm gonna change because I've got two fields on top of each other. This needs to come from invoice details parts. I need the product IDFK, and then the description here is gonna come from products. That's still correct. The amount needs to come from invoice details parts as well, because we are in the parts tab right now. The price lookup comes from invoice details parts, so does the total, and actually everything does. So it's a bit handier to set this all up at first. The total comes from invoice details parts. Okay, let's try this out now. I've got this is on my second invoice, and I've got a bunch of wheels here, which looks kind of funny. Let's have a look at my invoice details to see if this is all correct or not. No, this is not entirely correct yet. There is something still going wrong. Did I maybe miss a field or something? Let's see. Invoice details parts, and the description is coming from products. Yeah, I think I've made the mistake here. So I need to make another copy of this one, and this is going to be products parts, because I'm displaying my records from this one, and I was displaying my product name from this one. These are not related, so that's not going to work. Let's get this to be a bit bigger. Product IDFK goes to product ID, and then I'm going to need this one as well for my services. So let's alt drag this one down, and let's do product IDFK, product ID. Yep, and let's call this one products services or service. Singular. Okay, cool. So let's change the description here to come not from products but from products part. And then it's looking better. And now I've got only my parts showing up and not my services. And these are all part and none of these are service. So if I would add a new one here, and this one is still showing my services. That's another thing I need to fix in a second. If I do like a trailer hitch, you can see that the value part is automatically filled in and it shows up automatically. That's kind of cool. All right, so I don't need this one anymore right now. So let's get rid of this one, and let's make this a little smaller again. Okay, so one more problem to solve is that this drop down is showing me all kinds of products that I don't want. Let's go into here and let's see how we could restrict that. So I've got my part field here and my service field here, so I can use those because my products also have a type field in there, and I can use that because that value here needs to be the same I can use that to make a conditional value list. So I want to see only the products that are a part. I'm going to take this one and drag it down here. It's going to be, well, I'll just put it up here for a second. I'm going to call this one products. I'm going to call this one conditional value list, so CV, and this is going to be for the part. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that this field will contain the value part, and I want that to be equal to the type of product, so that that only shows the parts. Now what I can do is I can just go into parts, edit layout, move this out of the way, and then create a new drop down. I'm going to make a new one, and I'm going to say I don't just want to see all the parts, I want to see all the products. Oh, let's do products, conditional value list part. And so I'm going to use the values from the field products conditional value list part. This setup is the same as it used to be, but I'm going to not include all values. I'm going to include only related values from the invoice table. So in the invoice table, we had our value part. And so that's what I want to restrict my list to. I'm going to check this one as well because I don't want to show the IDs. I just want to show the names here. Okay. And then if I click my drop down here, I am seeing only the products that are of the type part. This is now a conditional value list, and it's showing me only these parts, which is cool. So I can fix this again and put them on top of each other again. And this one, let's have a look here. The description needs to come from products parts. That's good. Okay, so this one is all fixed. This is showing me my parts, and it is showing me the total for my parts. So if I take this one away, yes, then my total updates here, and that's kind of cool. Now I need to do the same thing for my services. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one from parts. Oops. I'm going to quickly lock this one so I can draw a bit of a square here. I'm going to unselect the unselect the tab object because I don't want to copy that one. And what I'll do really quick is I'll group this so I can put this on a logical position. The position of this one is 60 from the left and 210 from the top, so I'm going to try to remember that. I'm going to copy this one, and then I can already ungroup this one again because this doesn't have to be grouped. I'm going to delete all the stuff that was still in here from the previous time, and then I'm going to paste this stuff on here. And I have completely forgotten what my values were. It was like 6210, was that it? Yeah, that looks kind of right. Okay, cool. So now what I need to do is ungroup this one, and now I need to change a bunch of stuff. So this one needs to display not invoice details parts, but invoice details service, and then I have to change all of those fields as well. So I need to move this one out of the way because there's a field at the bottom here. And basically when I change my table here, the same field will still be selected, and that's probably all going to be good. My product service is going to show up here, so that's that. I will need to still make another drop down for this, but I'll do that in a second. Let's update all of these fields to come from the correct table occurrence. And then let's update the total as well. And that's already looking good, just need to change the drop down, and I need another table occurrence for this, so I'm going to alt drag this one over here for a second. Conditional value list for service. And in this one, the type needs to be equal to the service value. So I can do that, drop it down here, just put it a little lower. I'm going to hit OK so that this one can get a new drop down. Actually, I'm going to duplicate this one and then do service. And I'm going to say I want from the CV service to use the ID but see the description, include only related values starting from the invoice table, and I'm going to show only the values from the second field. That's basically the same thing we just did. And then let's have a look. This should be going pretty well. Yes, I'm getting only my services in here, and that's pretty good. So I can close this up again, put them back on top of each other. There you go. Okay, so now this way, what we've done is we've got two different we've got the exact same view as we had before when we had different tables, but now we're just showing the parts and the services, but they're all coming from one and the same table. So let's go into invoice details and let's have a look. Let's modify and add the type field. So now we can see that we've got one here that doesn't have, I think this was one that already existed. This one that didn't get the type yet. And if I add new types now, installing trailer hitch amount 1. Okay, let's have a look if I did all of that correctly. Yeah, so now I've got some parts and some services. And because in my invoice details, I now have this type field, which is automatically filled in and showing me the correct type, I can now use that in my report. I can simply create a new part, which is, again, like we did before, a sub-summary when sorted by invoice details type. I'm going to print this above. I'll say that I would like this to be a little higher. Let's say 24. I'll use a text to create a box here, and then I'm going to insert a merge field, which is going to be from the invoice details table, the type. And I'll maybe give this a bit of a bold, maybe a little bigger. Yeah, something like that. Let's zoom in a bit to see if my field is really within the bounds of my part. Yes, that's looking kind of good. And this is maybe better to be description. Okay, let's zoom back out and let's go into edit layout and let's maybe sort these by type. And then as we can see on our invoice, we do get all of the parts and all of the services all grouped together nicely. Of course, you'll need to make a little script to actually print this invoice. What you need to do in that script, you know what, we'll just quickly make it. Lay invoice, let's make a little print button here. Print, and if you want, you could add a little, I'm sure there's a little printer in here somewhere. Make it bigger. Okay, kind of cool. And that needs to be a script, and the script is going to be very simple. Print invoice is going to be set variable because we need to take the invoice ID with us and search only the items that are on that invoice. So we're going to start with the invoice ID. That's something that we need to remember. Then when we go to the layout and when we go to another layout, before we do that, I just want to, oops, typing on all the wrong buttons. I want to freeze my window because I don't need to see all these changes. Then I'm going to go to layout. The layout I'm going to go to is going to be the report invoice. Well, it's not, it doesn't have to be called parts anymore, but that's from before. I'm going to go to this layout, I'm going to enter find mode, and I'm going to turn my pause off. Then I'm going to set field. The field that I'm going to set is going to be from my invoice details. I'm going to look for all the invoice details of a certain invoice, which I've brought the ID with me. So the value I'm going to use is this one, $invoice ID. That's the name of the variable, and that variable contains a value. It's the ID of my invoice, so that's good. I'm going to use that. Then I'm going to set error capture on, perform find, and then I'm going to do a sort of the records. I'm going to set the dialog off, and I'm going to specify in my script myself exactly how I want to do this sort, and I'm going to sort by the invoice details type field. There, and then I'm going to do a little page setup or print setup with the dialog off, and I'm going to specify that my page needs to be like this in this direction, this orientation, and then I'm going to do a little print with the dialog on. That's good. And when that is done, I'm going to go to layout, original layout. Okay, I'm going to save this whole thing. I'm going to do my button setup, which is going to perform a script, and that's going to perform the script print invoice. I'm also going to change my cursor to a hand, and maybe I want to give this a nice little color, like a blue. Sure. And now if I hit this print button, if everything goes well, your records should be printing. Do make sure that the print is set to records being browsed. If that is not set up here, you need to go back into your script and maybe check that. I'm going to cancel because I don't need to print this right now. But if all is well, then your printed invoice should come out. And that kind of is the way that you can separate and create different tabs with different portals for all different things. But you can still have these items on your all on one symbol printed invoice. Okay, so we've got parts and we've got services. Now maybe, if you guys are still in the mood for that, we could take this one step further, because sometimes you might have parts, sometimes you might have services. Sometimes you might want to have the ability to just simply add stuff manually, where you can just type in a text yourself and then fill in these things also by yourself. If you'd want to do that, we could add a little part for that as well. My tab control here is locked, so let's unlock it so we can double click and edit it, and we can do miscellaneous. Yeah, do you write it like that? Something like that, I'm not sure. Okay, so miscellaneous. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lock this one up again. I'm just gonna copy this whole thing, except I'm not gonna take this. I'm not gonna copy the tab object, so I'm gonna just quickly group this. I'm gonna copy it. Look at the values here, 6210. Yep, I'm gonna ungroup this again. I'm gonna paste this. Somewhere here it was like 60 and then 210. So I just use my arrow keys to kind of get it in the right position, and then it looks kind of good. It looks the same as on the other ones. Good, so I'm going to ungroup this again, and now I need to make some changes. So if, as you can already guess, I'm going to need another one of these. And if I need another one of these, I'm going to relate them to another one of these. So I need to start with fields, and I'm going to do a g_misc. And that's going to be a text, and it's going to have the value miscellaneous. Okay, and again, I need to make sure that my tables, my existing invoices actually get that value. So that means I have to go in here, I have to add this field. And this, of course, doesn't have any values in it because that's an auto enter, and that doesn't do anything for existing records. So I'm going to go into my records, replace field contents. There you go. So now my existing invoices actually do get that value. That's kind of good. Now that I have that, I can go back to my layout for my invoice. I can go to File, Manage, Database, and now I can just create another one of these. I'll just put these guys maybe on the side here for a bit, and I'm going to just take one of these and I'm going to Alt, drag it down, and I'm going to call this one Invoice Details Misc. Cool. So now I need to relate these as well. So there's going to be the same thing. The ID of the invoice goes to invoice ID, and the miscellaneous goes to, I need to drop this down a bit, the type field. So that stays the same. Got to make sure that I have allowed the creation of records and delete related records when a record is deleted in the invoice table. Okay, I don't need to relate anything to this because this is just going to be like manually typed in stuff. Now, if I want to manually type stuff in there, I need a field for that as well. So in my invoice details, I need to do a sort of Misc manual entry. Okay, that's a very long name, but that way we know exactly what it is. Okay, cool. Let's go to our miscellaneous, and then let's have a look at this stuff. So I've got my, this field can go because I actually have a field here, which is from invoice details services. So let's change that to invoice details Misc, and let's do miscellaneous manual entry. Now I did change some of the stuff here, like for instance I made this unavailable in find mode, so I'm going to reset this one, and this does not have to be a drop down, but it has to be an edit box. Amount needs to come, all of these needs to come from invoice details Misc, so let's change them all. Invoice details Misc, invoice details Misc, and also the total at the bottom. Okay, cool. Oh wait, what was this here? Oh yeah, okay, cool. So now we need to check this out. We could manually enter stuff here, which is cool. I can say the amount needs to be 1, the price needs to be, let's say, 10, and then this becomes 10, and that becomes 10 as well. That's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. Maybe let's go back for a second and have a peep in here. Allow the creation of records. Yep, all of that is good. Let's try here. Oops. Ah, yeah, something is going wrong here. Let's have a look, because I've got a whole bunch of records showing up here and like only one showing up here, so this is kind of weird. I'm not able to create any new ones here, so I've missed something. Oh yeah, this one is coming still from the portal wasn't set up properly yet. Okay, so now this looks better. I can manually enter some other stuff here. I could say amount 5, 10, and that then becomes 50. Okay, and if I click outside of here, this one updates and it gives me a total. Because this one doesn't have any other stuff in there, the total is still 60. If I add a part, then the total is going to go up as well. And now if I go to my invoice, if I would, then I'm still looking at my let's quickly do it like this. Let's quickly click this one but hit cancel, and then I should have performed my find in here. And if I look, Command U, okay, so my seat is showing up, that's good, but my miscellaneous stuff is not yet showing up. And the reason for that is that this seat comes from the product table, but these items that I had manually entered, they actually come from a different field. So the easiest way to kind of deal with this is to just Alt drag to copy this field, and then to just go into invoice details and to take this Misc manual entry and to just put the both of them on top of each other. Now, if you're going to want to do that, you're going to want to make it sure that the fill of the top field is none. And in fact, let's do that for this one as well, so that this field is transparent. And then we'll put both of them on top of each other, so that if, let's do this, if it's a product, then the product name shows up. If it's not a product, there will not be a product name, but there will be something entered in here. So now I've got my miscellaneous, my parts, and I could even add services, etc., as well. So let's go to lay invoice. Let's go to browse mode again. So I've got a seat. Let's add a trailer, hitch, or 3. Let's add some services here, and let's add some maintenance. And now I've got a whole bunch of stuff. Let's cancel this, but then let's have a look at my report. And we can see that all of my items are all showing up. All of them, I've got these like nice little categories, and all of this is working pretty well. So as you can see, this is pretty flexible. You can have multiple different parts, if you will. You can manually enter stuff, or you can have products from different kinds of types of products. So a bit tricky with the global fields and the auto enter stuff and everything, but I hope that this makes sense, and then I hope that if you do it this way, you will not be dealing with trying to get multiple tables in one print layout. All right, ciao. If you guys want to learn a ton more about FileMaker, you can head over to my Udemy page, where I've got a bunch of entire FileMaker courses online. You can follow them, and basically we make entire FileMaker systems from scratch, and I'll take you on the entire process step by step. There is even one that is completely free, so you can just follow that free of charge, and that is a beginner tutorial where we make an entire contacts database. That's a really fun one that you can follow that can teach you the basics of FileMaker. So head over there by following the links in the description, and I'll see you guys there.